Right. Okay. I will try not to be distracted if we have some latecomers to the presentation, but thank you all for coming tonight to Where Do I Start? Planning a Vegetable Garden 101. So this is going to go over a lot of different materials, things that, oops, sorry about that, things that you may already know, some things that you may have had no idea about, and probably a little bit in between. So we're going to focus more on vegetables versus ornamentals or other things like that. And we'll touch on a wide variety of subjects. So that can be anything from pesticides, how do you plant, where do you plant, what do the plants need? It's such a vast amount of information that this is really just an overview course. I can provide all sorts of other information if you have more specific questions about this. I probably already have a presentation on it or have given one recently. So if you are, as we're going through this presentation and you see something that just, you're like, oh, I've got a question about that, please go ahead and drop that in the chat box below. And then when I get to the end of the presentation, I will be happy to answer as many questions as you have about that particular subject or anything else that pops into your head concerning vegetable gardening or even anything else. So with further ado, let's go ahead and start. So I did want to thank Shirley Baum for helping me put this together. I've gone ahead and tweaked some of this, but she is my right-hand woman and helps with a lot of these presentations. So thank you, Shirley. All right. So gardening is cheaper than therapy, plus you get tomatoes. I love this quote because a gardener, they really just seem to, that is their therapy. They love being outside. It doesn't matter if it's flowers or vegetables or, you know, trees or whatever, but it seems like that really gives us peace of mind. And this is not my garden behind me. This is somebody else's garden because obviously it's green and it's not really green yet outside. It's just starting to do that. But most of us probably agree that when we are outside and we have our hands in the dirt and we're digging things up and we're pruning things and making it look better or choosing flowers at the nursery, that we just get this little high from that. I guess maybe you could kind of, it's an analogy to like a runner's high. Personally, I don't know what that is. I've never experienced it, but I love gardening, and I think that gardening gives you a certain satisfaction as you're going through that. So we're just going to dive right in. And again, if you have any questions at all, just drop it in the chat box, and I will get to that at the end of the presentation. So some of the things that you're going to be going through when you're trying to plan a vegetable gardening. Let's say you just moved to a new house. You really don't know. You've got a blank backyard. It's just nothing there, maybe a couple tiny little trees. It's a brand new house. And you're like, what am I going to do? I need to figure out where I'm going to put my vegetable garden because I moved from one house that had one to this house that doesn't have one. So the first thing that you kind of need to do is just take a look at what you have and really just kind of assess the whole site and what it can offer. So you need to figure out what kind of garden you want. Maybe you're one of those people that is just super traditional and you want that in-ground garden. So that would be A, top right. And you're going to get out there and you're going to pull that sod up and you're just going to start working that ground and really just make it yours, and then have all of your vegetables in there, and you are just an in-ground start from scratch kind of person. And that's great. That can totally be what you want to do. You may want raised beds like B up there in the top left. I have raised beds. I also have some in-ground. Not saying you can't mix. A lot of people do mix. Raised beds are a little easier if you're dealing with a really, really hard pan clay. You can simply put those beds on the top of that. There's all sorts of different kinds. You can have cedar, you can have other types of wood, you can have plastic, get a metal, all sorts of different types of wood you can use to make those raised beds. They come in all different heights. So if you are mobility challenged, you may choose to have one that is perfect for you to walk right up to and you don't have to bend over. That would be perfect. There are quite a few community gardens around here that have those kinds of beds. Or if you're in a wheelchair or some other something where maybe you need to sit down, you can have it at such a height that you can sit there and garden. Maybe you just don't have a lot of space. Maybe you have a very tiny backyard. There's a lot of townhomes and other types of houses around now where they basically do all the maintenance for you. You don't have really any space to speak of. And so maybe square foot gardening is for you. That would be C down below, where you really are looking at kind of a raised bed and then you're partitioning that and planting a lot of different things in there in those small 1 by 1 foot area squares. Maybe you're just going to go for any type of container gardening. Maybe you only have a balcony, or maybe you just have a small little patio area that you can call your own. And so you can plant in all sorts of different containers like D. This is like a little barrel type container, but anything will do. I mean, you can get a 5 gallon bucket from Home Depot. There are some really nifty tiered structures that you can put the 5 gallon buckets in, and you can have a whole vegetable garden right there. And it's really just a very narrow area. You can do 3 buckets long by 3 by 3, so you can fit 9 in there in a very, very small area on a deck or a patio if you want to do that. And finally, straw bale gardening. Maybe, you just are curious about this and you've always thought about it. It can be a good idea. It's definitely usable for at least 2 seasons. A little challenging to get started, but it's kind of a little hybrid between a raised bed and an in-ground type situation. You can actually do this on top of concrete, like you see up there in the one near A. That would be E, letter E. And so once you've grown it for a couple seasons, let's say you need to get rid of it, clean it all up, haul it away. So it's mobile, if you will. You can have it there 1 year, get rid of it the next, and without much difficulty in doing that. Garden location. So most gardens are going to need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun daily. So if you're going to grow, and there's different types of gardens. You can have winter gardening, you can have summer gardening, and we'll go over some of those. But really for summer gardening and also for winter, you really need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun daily. So the easiest thing, you can actually get some little meters to go out there and measure how much sunlight you get. Just a little look at sunlight intensity. Or you can just kind of watch it and see if it's at your house on a weekend day, so in the summer, so you can kind of figure out how much sun you get. You really need to make sure that you have water nearby. I will tell you this, I live this all summer long. I have a rather large lot, and at the back of my lot, I have a power line right of way. I have a lot of shade trees, and over time everything has grown up. I just don't have much sunlight in my yard, but I have that power line right away. And so my garden is out there, out back in the power line right away. And it gets about 6 hours of sunlight a day, which is perfectly suitable for growing vegetables, both in spring and summer. But it's far away from the water source. I have to have a really long garden hose that runs down there. And so I basically just have it in multiple pieces. I have a yard area, and then I have a lot of trees back there. The hose in the tree area just kind of stays there all year round. But it's a pain to try to put that together and get that down there for when I do have to water. So just keep that in mind. Water availability is very essential and necessary. You don't want it too close to trees, because this is going to cause problems when you need that sunlight, especially for plants that need more sun like tomatoes, for instance, in the summertime. Also, if you were thinking about putting some type of an in-ground garden, it's going to be really difficult to bust through all those roots. And honestly, that's not a good idea because you might injure those trees and then your trees are going to die. So you don't want it too close to the trees. But if you do have to, and that's your only spot to do it, go for something as far away outside of the drip line of that tree canopy as you possibly can go. That's going to be more in an area with the feeder roots and less likely to smother or cause issues with those trees. So just make sure that again, those raised beds, if you put them there, are as far away from the drip line of the tree. That's going to be how the canopy is. If you can see the trees behind me, basically where that canopy ends right there, that's considered the drip line. Okay. Consider slope. So here in Georgia, we have a lot of hills, and that's a lot of slope. Erosion is a big problem, big problem. So some of you may be blessed with fairly level yards. Most of us are not. So you have to kind of consider that when you're planting a garden. And this is where raised beds can be very useful because you can put some type of ground cover down, wood chips, pea gravel, something like that, landscape cloth, and then put that over the top of it, and then have your raised beds similar to what you see there in the middle, in there, and it's going to be less likely to have erosion problems. So that's something that you need to take into consideration. And then microclimates. Most people probably don't think about that, but microclimates can actually be an issue. So if you have a southern exposure on a wall of your house and you thought, oh, I'm going to add some raised beds right behind my house, close to my house, and let's say it's a brick house, that can hold heat. So that may cause additional problems in a heat wave where you're having over 100-degree weather. It may also be a benefit. It might allow you to plant a little earlier than maybe your neighbor who doesn't have that little microclimate. If you have multiple hills, cold air sinks. And let's say you're one of those that you just don't do a winter garden, you don't have a desire for that, but you love tomatoes and you want to get them in as early as possible. So you go out and you buy all your tomatoes and you're all excited, and you've got your garden happens to be kind of in a depression in your backyard. And let's say we have kind of a light frost or maybe even a freeze. If you were up on top of that hill, you may have not had an issue. But if your garden's at the bottom of that hill where that cold air sinks, you might lose some of those plants or have frost damage. So, think about that. We do tell people when you're placing fruit trees, for instance, try not to put them down in the valley, because that can actually nip your blooms. If you have an early blueberry or peach or something else that does tend to bloom a little earlier, you might want to put those a little further up the hill, just to be on the safe side. Preparing your garden. Okay, so lots of you probably know about soil tests. Extension does soil test, and we test for pH, so you know whether you're a little acidic, probably not basic. But if you've been adding things without really thinking about it, which is not what you're supposed to do, then your pH may be closer to neutral. Or sometimes we get folks that love their gardens to death and add lots of lime without checking the pH. And so suddenly they're up in the 8 or the 9 category. When their plants don't do very well, they come to us going, hey, why are my plants dying? They're not very happy. We'll go over that in a little bit. But doing a soil test when you're starting out gives you a really good idea of what you need to do to start. And to do that, it's very simple. You're going to go out wherever your garden's going to be, and you're going to take the bucket like you see there in that picture, and you're going to take a shovel, and you're going to get somewhere between probably 3 to 6 little samples of that area and dump it in the bucket. You're going to mix it up really good, and then you're going to take about 2 cups of that, and you're going to go down to the extension office and get a soil baggie, and you're going to put it in there and put vegetable garden on the crop code. there's a little cheat sheet there for that. There's a 3-digit code, and then you'll get your results back in 7 to 10 days. And at that point, you will know, what do you need to do? Do you need to lime it to get your pH to go up? Do you need to add potassium or some calcium or something? What do you need to add? Instead of just dumping stuff on the soil, this way you know what you need to add, so you're not wasting money. You can do a jar test to figure out what you need if you need to add organic matter. So the next kind of thing that you want to think about, if you're starting a brand new garden and it's specifically if it's an in-ground garden, but definitely usable in other types, you might want to figure out what kind of soil type you have. And some of you may be saying, I didn't even know I had a soil type. Well, yep, you do. And so you can see the little infographic off to the left there, and you're going to fill that clear glass jar, put some soil in there, shake it up a little bit, and then just kind of let it settle. And you can see how much clay, how much silt, and how much sand you have. And that's going to really depend on where you are. If you were down in the southern part of the state, you'd have a lot more sand. If you're up here and you're in a newer subdivision, you may have all clay just because a lot of the developers will strip off that topsoil and they'll actually sell it. So they may put sod on top of it, but there's no topsoil beneath it. So you may have to do a lot of amending to that soil to make it happier so that your plants are good. And that'll help you determine, do you need to add maybe some sand and some organic matter into that heavy clay soil when you're tilling it up to sweeten the soil. That's what we typically say, sweeten. And then you also want to try to look up and see the last frost date and the first fall frost date. We recently, it looks like most everybody is from in Gwinnett County. I've got a few surrounding. So recently, those hardiness zones changed. So it was a 7B where I am in Lawrenceville, and now it's an 8A. That's not a tremendous difference, but it makes for a few days difference in when that first fall frost date falls and the last spring frost date. But honestly, I tell folks, don't hold that to a hard and fast rule. Just use that as a rule of thumb. You want to watch the weather, folks, and generally they'll know about 10 days out when that last frost is due. So we had some cold weather here earlier this week. That's probably maybe the last hurrah. There may be one more, but most likely it's not going to dip below freezing. I think we're pretty much done with that. That does not mean run out and plant everything. So around here, most folks will say, just wait till tax day. You can get your plants, keep them in the garage, but it's no fun running out there and trying to throw some type of covering over your plants when they're expecting it to drop below freezing. So infrastructure needed, that's a fancy way of saying all the goodies in the garden. So you got a shed, so you've got to have some place to store all of your equipment, your hose, your shovels, your trowels, your buckets, all that stuff. Most people find that if they have to walk too far, they start to get annoyed. That's why we end up with a she shed. I don't have a she shed. That would be where my lawnmower is. So, but it would be nice to have a she shed. I do, however, have multiple sets of gardening equipment. I have some in my garage. I have some downstairs on my deck in a small shed area. And then I do keep some just out in my garden because it's really annoying walking up the hill. I have about an acre. I don't want to do that. So you may find that it makes much more sense to have a small shed out near where your garden is. Fencing. Most of us are going to be living in the suburbs now, and deer are a problem. So if you're going to have a garden and deer are an issue around where you are, you need to think about that. And I did do a program on deer proofing your landscape. There's a lot of good tips and tricks in that. At the end of this presentation, the last slide has a QR code that will take you directly to our Metro Master Gardener YouTube page where all of these are recorded and stored. So you can watch that at your leisure if you would like. But just note that with deer, you have to have a relatively tall fence. It doesn't have to be near as perfect and wonderful looking as the one that's behind my picture right here, with the beautiful uh, hot wire that's around the top. But deer do jump upwards of 10 feet. So just beware, if you do have a deer problem, it may make sense to have a hot wire, or if you do have a taller privacy type fence or something like that, to have a hot wire on the top. They will learn really quickly not to bother that. And then trellises, stakes, and other supports if you're going to have vining types of plants. So beans, pole beans, things like that. You want to keep in mind when you're planning all of this, and we'll go through that, just kind of keep in mind what you're going to do. If you have raised beds like you see here in the left one, you can get really inventive. This is just cattle panel that's been bent over. You can grow cucumbers on that. You can grow all sorts of vining stuff on that. I've seen watermelons on these. Now, watermelons are very heavy, so I've seen some people come out with some interesting pantyhose adaptations, and they put them in a sling to hold their cantaloupes or their watermelons up and tie them to the fence. But hey, it works. So, ingenuity. You're going to identify supplies needed. So you're always going to need organic matter. The sunlight, UV light, breaks down organic matter over time, and you have to keep adding it. So that's going to be mostly compost, and you can make your own or you can buy it. You also want to have mulch, and that's going to prevent erosion. Now, some people may be thinking mulch is in stuff you add to the ground. I'm talking about the stuff you leave on the top of the ground, like you see that wheat straw there, but it can be anything. It can be pine straw. Maybe you have a lot of pine trees on your property. You can use pine straw. You can use wood bark. Don't mix it into the soil, because wood bark is what we call a nitrogen sink. So the bacteria are going to break that down, and you don't want that nitrogen being taken out by the bacteria. You want that in there for your plants. Otherwise, you're going to start seeing some yellow stunted plants. They won't be happy. But you can put that on the surface of the soil, and that will help keep the moisture, especially when it's super hot out, and the evaporation rate is high. It will help keep all that moisture in your soil, and that's for the plants. It will also help prevent disease. So if you have, for instance, later on, after 2 to 5 years, maybe you get some blight from your tomatoes in there. It'll help prevent splashback, which can help reinfect your next year's tomato. So by putting a mulch down over the top of the soil, that can prevent that, or at least prolong it before you end up having to deal with it. And then equipment and tools, of course, containers to put things in, fertilizer, soil, that kind of stuff. If you want to start your own seeds, then you're going to want to use grow lights to start those inside. And there is a seed starting recording on there that Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and you can watch that and get more familiar with that. A shovel, garden fork, hoe, trowels, all sorts of that kind of stuff. You'll want those. Pruners, thinning scissors, and string, twine, stakes, that kind of stuff, all of that. And you may not buy it all at once, but you'll probably find that you'll need it as you go along. You'll also want to get fertilizers. In this case, these are all listed: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. These are all listed as organic sources. A lot of people really want to go organic these days. I can't blame you, but it's a little more difficult because you have to be a little more familiar with chemistry. Plants need, at the least, at least 13 different elements. Some of them are called primary, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are all considered primary or macronutrients because they need the most of those. But there are quite a few others that are necessary in smaller amounts. And so you need to be a little more adept at identifying what nutrient deficiency you're dealing with if you're going to go organic, because you have to be able to identify the symptoms and then know what you need to use in order to adjust that. Most synthetic types of fertilizers will have both the primary or the macronutrients and the micronutrients, or the other ones that you need, all mixed in the same bag. So the one up here in the top right corner, just a 10-10-10 fertilizer. That one, if it has, I don't know if it has micronutrients in it, but if it does, that's called a complete fertilizer. So super simple. You can spread a little out there when you're first planting, and your plants will be happy all of summer long. But with a lot of organics, you actually have to think about it and you have to plan, and you've got to be a little bit more educated on what it looks like. Again, there is a treating nutrient deficiencies organically taped presentation that is on that channel. You can watch that. And if you want to go that direction, you can reach out to me and I will be happy to provide that slide deck to you as a source of reference. You also have to think about pH adjusters, lowering the pH. That doesn't happen often, but sometimes we get people that are a little crazy with wood ash, which can raise that pH up into the basic or alkaline above 7 range. And if you go much further than that, the plants get unhappy. Mostly for us, it's raising the pH or lowering the pH. Sorry, flip that. Lime, organic matter, wood ash, that is raising the pH. 7 is neutral. 5 to 5.5 or 5.6, something like that, is generally what you'll find around here when it's not been adjusted. And most plants outside of blueberries and a few others are happier when it's in the 6.2 to 6.8 range. So in order to do that, you usually do have to adjust it a little bit. Continuing to identify supplies. You're going to have pests. Whoops. You're going to have pests. Georgia is just ripe with all sorts of pests, bugs, fungal organisms, bacteria, different blights, things of that nature. We just have it all. We're not really lucky that way, but it is a very hot and humid environment here in the summer, and that's just how it is. So these are organic selections here: horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, neem oil, pyrethrins, and then there's certain types of traps. Beware of the pheromone traps. I know some people use them for Japanese beetle. You're only attracting the males. The females are still out there because it's a pheromone trap. And so you may get a few, but all that should do is show you how many you have. So then you know you need to treat in order to reduce the population. So just use that as a tool, not as a way of actually reducing the population. Again, there is a video up on that Metro Master Gardener about organic pest control methods. So I encourage you to watch that if you have questions or thinking about going down that line. Irrigation equipment. So this is very important because we usually go from hot to dry again, really wet, maybe a hurricane, and then dry again. So it's just this big yo-yo over the summer. And we really need to have a consistent watering schedule. So make sure that whatever you have, it's good quality, and a hose, at least one hose, maybe a backup hose, sprayer head, watering can, sprinklers, hoses, timers, have all of that stuff because you will need it. It's a rare summer where we don't have a bit of a drought for maybe 3 or 4 weeks where we just don't get any rain at all. And you don't want to lose all your plants because of that. Okay, so just make sure you invest in good equipment, irrigation equipment. Choosing seeds and transplants. So you want to choose plants that are appropriate to the season. So I do a lot of teaching with the Harvest Gwinnett Community Gardens. They have, that's a program through Gwinnett County Community Gardens, and we'll do Gardening 101 classes and other stuff there. And we love new folks to come to those. You can learn so much, and it's such a good feeling to see folks coming and really getting excited and into it, and then we can help them learn so that they don't buy the wrong things and get really upset and then stop gardening. We want them to learn. We want them to be nurtured just like little plants so that they keep coming back and wanting to continue to do it. You can't learn everything in one season. I mean, most folks who are considered veteran gardeners have been doing it their whole lives. So you really need to just be cool with yourself and just say, hey, it's going to take me a while. If I kill stuff, that's fine. Don't ask me how many plants I've killed. I've killed a lot. Anyway, make sure when you're choosing plants that you're choosing plants that are appropriate to the season. One of these slides coming up, I've got the UGA vegetable planting chart. There's a QR code on there. You can get your own digital copy of that, and it will tell you everything you need to know about when, how deep, what time, what season, all of that stuff. It'll tell you everything. But consider cool season crops. So we have two very distinct seasons here. You can plant your fall crops in September, beginning of September, and that can run you through December, January, February. Usually we'll have some killing frost then. And then we have kind of a shoulder season where you get a second chance for some things like lettuces and other stuff in February through usually May or June. And then you've got your warm season crops. So you would plant after the danger of frost, which is usually mid-April. And those are going to be your tomatoes, your peppers, okras, eggplants, sweet potatoes, beans, and corn, things that like warm temperatures. The ones above in cool season, the leafy greens like your lettuces and your mustard greens and all of that kind of stuff. Those have a little bit of natural antifreeze so they can tolerate those colder temperatures. Brassicas, cabbages, and broccolis, and Brussels sprouts, and things like that. Carrots, root vegetables, sweet peas, sugar snap peas, beets, and some potatoes. Those you can do in early spring and or fall. And then you're going to also want to select resistant varieties. So let's say you're like me and you're unhappy because the blight found you. It will, it always will. I have horrible luck with tomatoes, but there are some actual semi-resistant or persistent, or sorry, if diseases are persistent, there are some scientific breakthroughs in tomatoes cultivars that are actually somewhat resistant to these. So the ones that you need to look out for: fusarium wilt, Verticillium, nematodes, and there's some things you can do with nematodes, and then the alternaria blight. So look for specific varieties. I'm going to plug the Snellville um, community garden because one of our master gardeners, Wes Nettleton, is over there in the greenhouse. They will grow from seed a lot of tomato plants that are resistant. I believe one of them that I do like that does well is called Defiant. He will sell those at the Snellville Farmers Market and also at the Gwinnett County Master Gardener Association plant sale, which is on the 27th of April at the Lilburn Library. So you can check that out. They have a website. You can go check them out there. And you also want to be familiar with optimal germination temperatures. Again, the planting chart that I will show you here in not too long will give you that: days to maturity, determinate versus indeterminate if you're a newbie. Determinate means on tomatoes that they produce all of their fruit all at one time. Roma tomatoes are a good example of that. Indeterminate means that you're going to get one fruit here, one fruit there, and it will go all the way through the summer through frost. And then susceptibility to frost, you want to know what you're dealing with there. Is it tender? Is it not tender? That kind of thing. Know before you sow. So here's the vegetable planting chart that I told you about, and that QR code will take you right there. You can see it gives days to maturity, the cultivars of that particular type of vegetable, spring planting dates, whether you do it in spring or fall, and when, seeds or plants per 100 feet, spacing of rows and plants, and depth to plant. So it's got all sorts of really good information, and that is a digital form. You can get that printed off. And it's 2 pages, actually. This is just 1 page, but it will talk about both winter and summer vegetables. And again, don't panic. If you don't have something to get this QR code, this will be posted on that Metro Master Gardener channel. You can catch it there. So draw a diagram of your garden. So here's just an example. It's an 8-foot garden. This person's going to have a bunch of potatoes, some bush cucumbers, tomato plants, peppers, onions, all sorts of goodies. So kind of sketch out what you want and see if you like that. Figure out if you're going to use seeds or transplants. Some things do better as seeds. For instance, like carrot seed, that stuff's tiny. You're probably not going to do transplants on that. But you may want to with cabbages, and you may want to with tomatoes and peppers. For instance, tomatoes, you probably would have wanted to start those in early to mid-January so that they are a larger size here by the time you're ready to plant in mid-April. A lot of us are very sad that tomatoes only really like to produce in the 70-degree range, and when it reaches about 90, they turn their blossoms off, and then we have to wait until it cools back down again. So some of us will try to get our plants as big and mature as possible before we plant them so that we have a better chance of getting the maximum amount of fruit before it gets super hot. You also need to know the approximate date for planting here and days to maturity, that kind of stuff. You can use the planting chart that I showed you on the previous slide and the end of harvest, and then figure out how many seasons you want. So maybe you just want to do a summer garden and you're not a real winter garden kind of person, or maybe you just want to do a winter garden and annual flowers in the summer. It's all up to you. Starting seeds indoors. Figure out, is that something you want to do? It sounds intimidating. It really isn't. You can watch that video that I was talking about that's up and kind of decide if that's not something that you might be interested. It can be fun because a lot of these really cool different varieties of vegetables that are out there with the pretty colored carrots and the resistant tomatoes, and maybe it's a different color of tomato and you can't find it. I mean, let's face it, Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart will carry them, but they just have the same old, same old. They rarely will have anything that's cool and unusual. If you're really into gardening or you're really thinking about getting into gardening, seed catalogs can be very addictive. You get to see all the goodies that are there, and most of that stuff isn't available in the big box stores. So if you want that stuff, you're going to have to actually grow it from seed. Don't be intimidated. It's really not that hard, and you can get a pretty decent setup off Amazon for, $50, and maybe go a little bit more if you want to do multiple trays, but honestly, it's not that bad, and it's very rewarding. It can also help keep disease out of your garden, specifically with tomatoes. A lot of that is carried on the pots that you get from Bonnie Plants or some of those others. That's all just really insidious in the greenhouse industry. They treat and they sanitize, but it always gets in there. So if you're doing your own growing, you can skip a lot of that. Figure out oxygen, proper soil temperature, oxygen, light, darkness, that kind of stuff. Seeds indoors 6 to 10 weeks before transplanting. I'm not going to do too big of a deep dive into starting seeds indoors because there is that other presentation that you can watch. There's about an hour of good information on that. But you do need to kind of keep all of that in mind. Thinning and transplanting into larger pots and stuff like that. It does take some labor, but that's a labor of love. And you can say you grew it from seed. Planting them into the soil. So one way you can do around here is you can mix that compost in the soil. As you're planting, you scratch it in a little bit, but you put that compost on top of the soil. Don't mix it in too much, but as you're planting stuff, you can kind of scratch it in around the plant. Consider the fall factor. So if you're going to be planting fall gardens, know that those shorter days actually means less sunlight intensity because the sun is at a different angle and it's not going to be, that's why it's cooler. So it's not going to be as warm and it's not going to have the intensity that it does in the summer months. So it can actually take about 15 days longer to mature for some plants. So just keep that in mind if you're wondering why it's not growing so fast. If you're growing in the wintertime, you want to think about hardening off your transplants. So if you started those inside and they're used to that cushy 70-degree climate controlled weather in your house, and then you take them outside in the early spring where it can drop down in the 40s at night, and then it might be back up to the 70s, consider taking a few days where you put them out, bring them in, put them out, bring them in, and to get them used to that, because you can get some transplant shock, and you don't want to do that if you've put all that hard work into it. So basically, you're just putting those transplants in a hole after they're used to being outside, filling that with water, and then put some soil around it. And there's some tips and tricks if you're doing different types of plants like tomatoes. You can plant them a little deeper. There's just different techniques. Don't worry yourself about that if you're brand new to this. There's all sorts of things that you can do, but just stick with the oldie and goodie ways of just digging a hole and putting it in if it's a transplant. And then one tip to kind of remember, the smaller the seed, you can take sand or you can take a handful of mulch or soil and mix those really tiny seeds like turnip seeds or carrot seeds in with that soil and then broadcast that. It'll make them easier to get out there so you don't clump them all up into one spot. And let's see what else. Water every day or two until the new leaves appear. And then once they're up and you've got decent growth on them, then you're going to mulch those plants. And that's to help conserve moisture. Because here in Georgia, if you're doing a fall garden, especially, you may go a long period all the way into almost January where we don't really have a lot of rain. That typically is our dry season. We typically have thunderstorms here starting in like April, May, and then it'll kind of switch to the afternoon pop-up thunderstorms in the summertime that are spotty. So no guarantees. The only time we really get a lot of rain in the fall from like October through January is going to be if there's a tropical storm that comes through. Generally, that's the dry season. And then after December, January, we kind of flip to the winter season where we get these big Gulf lows that dump, anywhere from an inch to 3 inches over us. And we're still getting those. We're supposed to get one of those tomorrow afternoon. And we're very thankful for those because that's generally when we recharge all of our aquifers and our lakes, in case you were wondering. All right, garden maintenance schedules. So this one's the pie in the sky where you have multiple people in the garden doing watering and weeding and other stuff. Most times it's only one person in a house that's doing it, but you may get others. But in a community garden setting, generally you're going to have a maintenance schedule. That's kind of normal to have. But you want to identify
We'll
the
go out
specific.
so I can listen to this.
Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. You're going to identify the specific chores, indicate who is responsible, and you're going to note the frequency of those chores. So have a talk because open communication is the best thing to have. And nobody likes having to do all the weeding and all the watering because sometimes it's really hot and nobody wants to be out there. Smart planting in the garden. So there's different things you can do, different techniques. And I'll dive into a little bit, but you could do companion planting, and that's where you can plant vegetables next to other types of plants that maybe repel pests, or one plant will support one another. Sometimes you have a heavy feeder, nitrogen feeder like corn, and you can plant beans nearby, and those are nitrogen fixing. So one will use it, and one will make it. You can have pollinating plants that are planted in between, and those will attract pollinators, which is what you need for your garden. You can also do trap planting. So tomatoes, we have a lot of leaf-footed bugs around here, but you can plant sunflowers and that attracts them. They like the sunflowers. So if you're lucky, they'll go to the sunflowers and leave your tomatoes alone. You can interplant crops. So sometimes this is done for confusing pests. You can pair crops that have shallow and deep roots. Some of you may be doing that inadvertently, not realizing that's what it was called, but that is what it's called. Slow, fast maturity rates, tall, shorter plants, that kind of thing. It can be used in vegetables and it can be used in ornamentals and anything else. You might want to put some of the mycorrhizal fungi out there, fungi. I sometimes like to say that. It's just kind of funny. Most of your soils are going to have that as an inoculant, but let's just say that you've got a raised bed and you're putting bags of soil out there. Unless it's on the bag, it probably doesn't have it. You can get things like Soil 3 that's been added. But it basically is this little fungi that has a commensal relationship with the roots of whatever plant it is, and it can help with nutrient absorption and things like that. It's a good one. It's a good guy. So, but most of our soils are already inoculated with it. If you're in a raised bed situation where it's brand spanking new and you're adding the soil, consider purchasing that as an inoculant. You can certainly buy that on Amazon. You can get about anything on Amazon. And pollinator plants. Have that around your garden. So interplant them or put them around the edges in containers, put them in the ground. They will attract insects. I can't tell you how many people have complained to me that their gardens have very few pollinators, and that's because they're probably an oasis in a suburban desert. A lot of people just have foundation plantings that have no value to the pollinators. And so they keep coming to your house when they can find you and they know you have food for them. But if you're the only one there and they don't know you're there, they'll skip you. So get your neighbors on board for, if they don't want a vegetable garden, maybe put some pollinating plants in pots. All right, techniques to benefit your garden. Maintaining a high level of organic matter in your soil. So I think I mentioned before, UV light breaks down organic matter. So adding that back in on a regular is a good thing. Organic matter is going to stabilize your pH in your soil. It helps hold moisture in the soil, and it breaks down and provides nutrients. So you can layer compost on soil before planting. You can use a cover crop. That's what you see in that top right corner picture. Chop and drop, lawn trimmings, plant prunings, things like that, not weeds. We don't want to do that. Then you'll just be crying later. And composted manure. And I put Czech Providence on there because we do have some broadleaf weed killers now that our Grazon is an example. So if you go to the local horse farm, ask them, are you using anything to treat broadleaf weeds in your pasture? If they say Grazon, say thank you, but no thank you. And I say that because tomatoes, peppers, all of those plants are extraordinarily sensitive to Grazon. Grazon, well, most broadleaf weed killers will break down over time in UV light, so sunlight. So when you compost it, if you're turning your pile pretty regularly, it's going to break down if it's in there. So sometimes animals will eat the plant that's been sprayed with that, and it passes through in their manure. Some chemicals, active chemicals, pesticides like 2,4-D or glyphosate, those break down in a month or a couple months, maybe 6 months top. But Grazon is one that doesn't. It's not, it is usually, sorry, it is UV stable, meaning UV light doesn't break it down, and it can be persistent in the environment for up to 3 years. Now, some of you are going, oh my, I'm very scared now. Well, it's okay. It is, it's a growth regulator in plants. So it, as far as we know, and all the testing that's been done on it, which is extensive testing, it doesn't have any influence on humans. It's simply a plant issue. So you farmers love it because you can put your animals right back on it after you spray. But it's bad for tomatoes and other sensitive plants. They will react in parts per million, parts per billion in some cases, and it will look, you will get a really curled up leaf, you won't get any flowers, and you will cry because you spend all that time growing those tomatoes and you put them in there and they grew for about a month and then they just stopped growing. So ask the manure source, short of if you're buying it in a bagged situation, ask if what they've used on their pastures. So that's very important. And then consider creating your own compost pile, because then you know what goes into it. Mulch crops, that's going to conserve moisture, prevent weed germination, and prevent erosion of bare soil, and will add back nutrients into the soil. So I'm a big proponent of that, especially in the summer months when you get these really high evaporation rates because it's so hot. So definitely consider doing that. Pine straw is fine, wheat straw is good, and then the wood chips, you can get chip drop, will come and drop a big, big ton of chips there, and then you can just put them down. Don't mix them in the soil, but they're great for on the top. Avoid compaction. So you're not going to use heavy equipment. You'll want to designate walking paths. If you used raised beds, That works perfectly. You can walk all the way around them, and then consider no-till. Compacting soil, it makes it more difficult for the roots to grow through. You want it light and airy. And if you're rolling over it with a gator or something else, it's going to compact it down. And clay soils compact very easily because the soil particles are small. You're going to do a walkthrough. So look for signs of pests, bad bugs, good bugs. I've got a video up on those. You can watch those. Look for holes in leaves, chew marks, look for eggs on the underside of leaves. Know the life cycles, know the pests. Is it wilted, in need of water? Leaves turning yellow or brown, dropping? That might be a nutrient deficiency. Or you may have different types of insects. Signs of disease. Should you be harvesting? Some of these are part of IPM, or integrated pest management. And so looking for the insects and scouting. So that's a very important thing. Maybe you're doing those and you just didn't know it had a title, but it does. And so it's like a balanced approach. So you're going to look for and prevent damage. And you've got all sorts of different things in your toolbox that you're going to use. And the end goal is, if you have to use pesticides, you've exhausted everything else. So it's better for the environment for certain. But basically, it's just you being a responsible gardener, getting out there and identifying, monitoring, and assessing. Prevention, keeping the pest from being a problem. You've got a threshold, so you'll accept some damage, but not a lot. Keeping the numbers lower so that you can keep that damage to an acceptable level, and then finally eradication. These are your goals. You just kind of have to decide what you're wanting to do and is it actually reasonable. And then this is actually the integrated pest management. I'm not going to dive too much into this, that, we have lots of courses where we can talk about this, but this is basically the pyramid and the tactics: physical, mechanical, cultural, biological, and then synthetic pesticides up at the top. So that's the last resort. We would prefer to use everything else in our toolbox before we get there. So harvest produce frequently. The more you harvest, the more you'll get. Most of these plants, their end goal is to produce their seed and then die, because they're annuals. So if you don't harvest, that's going to come a lot sooner than what you had hoped. So you need to get out there and you need to harvest. I'm sure all of us who've had gardens have found a gargantuan cucumber that looked more like a zucchini. One of those big yellow ugly ones, and that shuts down flower production. So you need to make sure you're out there flipping those leaves over, looking in the vines, looking for those beans, getting them out of there. Even if it's big and old, pluck it and throw it off to the side in the compost pile. Just get it off the plant, because they'll stop flowering. So that's important. Watering. The roots use that water to transport nutrients, so you need to make sure that you are doing that consistently. I talked about a water schedule and who was, on the schedule to do that, and it's important that you keep doing that. So if it doesn't rain this week, then you need to get out there and you need to actually water. You don't want the root hairs to dry out, die. And you might see something like this where the blossom end rot. That's from inconsistent watering. That water helps transport calcium. Tomatoes are heavy feeders. They're going to fruit a lot, and so they need a lot of nutrients. If they can't get that to the fruit, this is one of the things that will happen. And nobody really wants that, because it's kind of gross, right? You can mulch around those plants, and that helps keep that moisture in there. And keep in mind, container plants are going to lose moisture quicker than in-ground plants, and that goes for raised beds because it's above the soil line. So if it's very hot, make sure you're mulching and you're watering, especially if you're using raised beds. Pruning the plants. Tomatoes, you're going to remove those lower leaves. You don't want splashback from soil, the spores. Remember, I talked about blight. You're going to remove those suckers and those indeterminate tomatoes. That'll help promote growth in the fruit, and it'll last longer. Peppers, top that plant, and it'll send out new shoots and increase production. Asparagus, mostly a springtime plant, which is emerging now, but after it's done and it's growing, and you see these big ferny looking um, stems. You're going to go through summer, they'll die back in the wintertime. Make sure you cut that back so that you can tell there's new spears. Berry bushes, prune those canes, the old canes out. And then grapes, you're going to prune those vines in late February. We're moving a little past that now. You should have done that in mid-February. And that goes for muscadine or bunch grapes. Understand fertilizer, NPK. I talked about secondary and micronutrients, nitrogen for shoots and leafy greens, phosphorus for roots, bulbs, and tubers, potassium for fruits, and disease resistance, general health. And make sure that you're choosing the type of fertilizer that is best for whatever fruit or vegetable that you have. A lot of times we just recommend a general 10-10-10 fertilizer for vegetable plants. But if you have blueberries, note that they need more specialized fertilizer. They're also heavy feeders because you get these big crops. Plus, you have the need for the acidifier for the soil. So keep that in mind. And appropriate soil pH. I mentioned most vegetables prefer like a 6 to 6.8. Here you can see the different types of, or the different ranges in pH for the different types of plants. So just note that whatever plants you're growing may have a favorited pH. So if you're growing blueberries and then you're trying to grow tomatoes in the middle of the blueberries, that's probably not going to work so well. The tomatoes aren't going to be very happy. So just please keep in mind when you're planting or you're doing what we call interplanting, you're putting different plants together, make sure you group plants that have the same pH needs. And that soil test will tell you that. And this is what I was talking about with having appropriate soil pH. So without jumping too much into this, you can see nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then we go down into the micronutrients. The yellow is somewhat available, green is very available, and red is not available. So, and then the pH is below. And it's kind of interesting to look at if you compare the previous slide, because you can see that obviously smaller amounts are necessary at lower pHs, and plants don't need a ton of those. But you can see how sometimes if you get too far up into the more alkaline range, you're not going to have availability of some of those micronutrients. And the same thing if you move down past 5.5 into the more acidic range. So it's important to have whatever you're trying to grow in the range that it's most happy. Frost protection, that's for late fall winter crops and early spring crops. Just make sure you have something available. You can have a row cover. You might have some, I've got some bottles here that were cut and just placed over the seedlings. You might have a cold frame. Just have a plan. If you want to try to put it out earlier, which when you get more experienced, you might want to try that, but just have a plan. And you can always look up first and last frost dates. This QR code will take you there. Trellises for large and vining plants. And so these can be used both in a raised bed situation and in a in-ground planting situation. And you can even use them in potted, like pots. You can buy tiny trellises. So you could grow cucumbers in a pot and you just have a little trellis and they crawl up the trellis. And I mean, there's all sorts of things, but just make sure that if you're going to do it, that you do it right. So trellising is great because you can help detect pests under there. And by being able to look at all the leaves, you don't have to flip everything over while you're leaning over. Maybe you got a bad back. So it's a good idea if you're doing that, or if you have that. It'll increase air circulation. So if you had downy mildew previously that showed up on cucumbers or something, you might be able to get away from that by increasing that air circulation. And if you're in a raised bed and you want to grow vining crops that take over a larger area, you can put these cattle panels up and bend them like this, and they will do a very good job of allowing you to go up. So just like a city where you have condos that are, much taller versus the sprawl of suburbia, you're doing the same thing in your raised bed situation. That'll keep the leaves off and insect and pest diseases are a little less. and it's easier to harvest. You can just stand there and pick things versus having to bend over and flip and look for fruits and vegetables underneath. And some of those options include teepees. You can see those up in the top right. Um, Natural branches, which you can, use bamboo for that. And then also with the Florida weave, which is the bottom right, that's what you see with the tomatoes there. Some people will use muscadine vines and things like that, weave that in there. Cattle panels, which are in the middle, and then stakes, of course. There's all sorts of different options. And so, why should I grow my own vegetables? Well, you're going to connect with nature. That allows you to get out there. Remember, I keep saying therapy. Um, we all need that. We all need a stress reliever. We all need an anxiety reliever. And getting out in nature really does that. So it makes us feel better. It makes us really want to get out there more, and it's addictive. And that's great. That's way better than having that glass of red wine after work every day. It's much healthier to go out there and pull weeds. Saving time and money. So obviously, you know where the vegetable came from and what you put on it. It's a lot cheaper. We're all dealing with a lot of inflation right now. So our money doesn't go as far. And if you're on a limited budget, growing your own vegetables is a very smart thing to do. It can reduce your grocery bills. Cutting back on waste. When you grow your own vegetables, you only harvest what you need. So minimize food waste. There is always somebody who is happy to take your tomatoes off your hands or your cucumbers. Sometimes zucchini can be a problem if you got a lot of that. But having all those fresh vegetables, you will have a lot of friends who are more than happy to take that off your hand if you have too much. And eliminating pesticides, you have total control over the growth process. So if you want to go organic, you can go organic and you don't have to worry about residues on your food, which is a peace of mind. You can grow exactly what you want. So in my case, I have blight in my tomatoes. I just go get the resistant varieties of tomatoes. And then I get tomatoes that I know I'm not using a lot of pesticides on and they're resistant. You can get your favorites. You don't have to go looking at Costco and Aldi's, Kroger's, looking for whatever it is you're looking for. Eating healthy makes it easier because you've got that food right there in your backyard instead of running out of something and having to go to the store. Growing more nutritious food. Most of that food that you're getting from the grocery store has been in storage for a period of time. So as it sits in storage, it will lose some of its nutrient value. Here, you just walk out in your backyard and you pick it, and you've got all that nutrient value right there. So it's better for you. And you're nurturing the environment. By managing the resource, you're growing your own food, you're helping the pollinators, reducing carbon footprint because you just walked yourself out to your garden to get your tomatoes. You didn't have a truck that hauled it from Peru to the airport where it jumped on an airplane and then it got flown up here to Atlanta and then on another truck that brought it out to the Kroger store. So, and you get the leftover plants. You can put those in your compost heap. So that's my presentation. I ran like 5 minutes over, which is pretty good. I sped it up a little bit at the end. But if you wanted to watch this again to try to catch some of the stuff that maybe you missed, that QR code in the bottom that takes you to YouTube's Metro Master Gardener channel will have this posted sometime next week, probably. And then there's all the other ones that are there that I have talked about. I might recycle some. I don't know when. I usually just kind of pick and choose, and I'm always trying to create new stuff that people might find interesting. But if you want to see what else we have available, you can go to the QR code on the left side of the screen, and that will show you all of the classes that we have at UGA Extension Gwinnett coming up. And I usually try to do personally a couple classes a month. And then our FACS department, Family and Consumer Sciences, will also have a handful of classes that they do that are virtual that you can sign up for if you're interested. And I'll leave that up there for a second. And let's see. I will go ahead and pull up the chat and see. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint deck? Email me. If you email me, I can get you a copy of the PowerPoint deck. Let's see. All right, let me go back up to the top. What veggies are best for container gardening that are more shady? Oh, you want shady vegetables? Well, most vegetables are going to be pretty sunny. Um, the benefit of having a container garden is you can kind of put that wherever, because wherever that sun is, you're not stuck with, oh man, I don't have any room over here in the side yard, but this is the only place where I get sun. So, um, you know, that doesn't, there are shady flowers, I guess, but not so much for container gardening for veggies. You still need the sun. You still need that 6 to 8 hours of sun. If that's not what your question was, you can just retype it down in the bottom. How much does it cost to get the soil tested? $8. And it's just called an S1, S as in Sam 1 soil test. And that will get you your pH, your macronutrients, excluding nitrogen, because that's kind of variable, and then a couple of the other macronutrients and some micronutrients. Let's see. How about bunnies? Is that an issue too? Yes, bunnies are an issue. If you put up a fence for the deer, it'll keep the bunnies out generally, but you can have turtle problems. You can have rabbit problems. There, sometimes people will put low-rise fences, like 2-foot fences that are chicken wire. They will sell it in 2-foot wide increments, and you can roll that around the base if you have rabbit issues. That'll keep the rabbits out, won't keep the deer out. It'll keep the turtles out. I had a turtle that lived in my garden over the summer, and it would go and take one bite out of all my cucumbers, right in the middle. And the vines were such a tangle, I couldn't find him until one day I walked down there and I saw him moving around. I did not relocate him. You have a soft spot for turtles, but I was angry that he took only one bite out of each cucumber. So yeah, wildlife can be an issue. Let's see, I hear more and more people that say they want to have a no-till in-ground garden. I personally think it's a bad idea. Roots need to be able to spread, but this is apparently the latest fad. What is Extension's position on no-till in-ground vegetable gardens? Agriculture uses no-till. It's honestly, if you keep up with the weeds and you don't have a weed seed bed, and you're just using something like winter rye or something like that, an annual rye, or I certainly wouldn't use any perennial type ground covers, because that would be a problem, like clovers. But that's entirely up to you. You may have some issue with competition for nutrients, but it's not bad necessarily. You just have to realize that you're probably making some extra work for yourself. Does planting neem trees close to the raised beds help? No. Neem oil is used as an organic pesticide and fungicide, and it's very useful for that, but you actually have to put that on the plant, and it's more of a contact type situation. Having something planted nearby is not really going to help. I'm a novice and planning to plant kale in raised beds and wondering how to prevent from overwatering them. The seeds just arrived. I'm curious if I should keep in the garage and then move outside. What other vegetables would be okay to plant alongside them? Okay, so kale here is typically a fall-winter crop. You're probably going to find it bolts. It's a little late in the season to kind of plant that. It can also possibly be a shoulder season crop. It's something I would have considered maybe planting in February, personally. But there are some varieties I've heard that people can get to go through June, maybe even July, but I'm not sure which variety that is. I don't personally grow it, but generally, if you grow it, it's probably going to be a fall winter crop. So you might want to stick those in your fridge and go for the fall winter. But if you just want to throw them out there and see what happens, I would put them out now. And you can interplant. So put them out now and allow them to germinate, come up. And then after the danger of frost, you can put your summer vegetables out. What are some summer non-nightshade vegetables like tomatoes? Um, Beans, corn, squash, watermelon, vining things, stuff like that. Um, let's see, paper and extension class at UGA. If I emailed you after this, could you respond? Yes, I can confirm your attendance. Dell Jenkins. Yes. I'm writing a note. Let's see. Thank you. Is there a paper on how many plants roughly for a family of 3 to 4? For a garden, how many should you plant? I'm sure there's resources out there on how big of an area, square footage wise, you would need in order to feed a family of 3 to 4. Off the top of my head, I do not know what that would be. Novice recently moved to Georgia from a colder state, so excited to grow my own vegetables. Yes. So I tried to make a lot of, we do get a lot of folks who aren't from around here, and a lot of people that move from northern tier states and from the Northeast, and it's vastly different up there. Trying to grow something up there, different, much different hardiness zone. You guys didn't deal with the problems of disease and fungal issues, all of that stuff. You usually didn't have to deal with any of that. So it's much more difficult and challenging. And there's a growing curve here, a learning curve, sorry. So you can reach out to me if you have questions. I'm happy to help at the email address that you see there. Yes, you can have a copy. Just email me. Very informative class. Thank you. Thank you. Most leafy greens do well with less sun, correct? That's why they tend to do well in the wintertime. The sun is much less intense. And thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, yes. Let's see. Yes, try new things. If you've only done summer stuff, try some winter stuff and see. Shoulder crop. That may just be a term for me. I know the travel industry uses shoulder season. I use shoulder crop. It's that kind of short little time in between when we usually get hard freezes in January and February, and then before the danger of frost is over, where you can usually plant something maybe in mid to late February that's more cold tolerant, and it will generally come up because by then we're usually getting some warmer days. And so you get an opportunity to grow some lettuces and some other things that maybe you didn't get it in the fall in time. So you get that short season, and generally that's dying out or bolting about the time that you're getting ready to plant your summer stuff, and then it'll die and you can pull it out and your summer stuff will grow and fill that area in. I do that quite often here at my house. How do you prevent the green horned tomato worm? The sphinx, the green tomato worm. So there are biocontrols. There's little parasitic wasps. Some people just hand pluck them. Some people choose to plant extra tomatoes to satisfy the worms because they are part of nature and that just happens to be their host plant. And then some people just pick them and squish them. So you have to kind of decide which side of the fence you're on, a pick and squish side or a let nature live side. Let's see, some easy shade loving plants, flowers that I can start planting now. Ornamentals, if you're interested, reach out to me and I can try to give you some, probably get some more specifics. We're kind of running low on time here. And let's see what else. What are easy to grow fruits here? Berries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries. Those are generally the ones that I recommend if you want to grow some type of fruit. Stone fruits like peaches and plums, those kinds of things, you can grow them here. Apples, you can grow them here, but you have to have what we call a spray schedule. They can be very labor intensive. I don't want to dissuade you from them. If you have the land and you want to try, you just need to make sure you are familiar with the spray schedule because you will have insect issues, you will have fungal issues, and it's very important that you stay ahead of it. I can get you a spray schedule. Just email me. Can orange trees grow here? No, no, they cannot. Citrus cannot grow here yet. If you want to try that, put it on a roller in a pot, bring it inside in the wintertime. Right now, Macon is about the upper line where you can get citrus to grow. UGA is researching that, and they have test gardens, and they are trying to come up with varieties of the Myers citrus to grow up here, but they are not there yet. Maybe in the next decade, I don't know. And I have native honeysuckle trellis near my vegetable garden, and the hornworms seem to like the honeysuckle better. So there are a lot of different species of the hornworms. They're not all the same. They have different host plants. There are some that like gardenias. There's some that like hydrangeas. They're all different species, and they all have different species of host plants. So for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about when I say host plant, when you see a moth flittering about or a butterfly flittering about, that's the adult form. The larval form or the caterpillar form, like the tomato hornworm, that's a moth, is its juvenile or larval form. And they have a particular type of plant or plants that they eat when they are that size and in that life stage. And that is called a host plant. And it's pretty specific to the species. So that's what I mean when I say host plant. So if you're seeing something on a honeysuckle trellis, that's probably not the same type of tomato hornworm, I should say, sphinx moth. That's the adult version. It's likely a different species. All right. Does anybody have any last minute questions? This has been good. Lots of good questions. I like that. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, you can email me at the email address you see there. If you have anything else, you can use that QR code to go to the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel and watch any of the ones that I have pre-recorded. And then I guess till next time, thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.